Okay, third grade readers, by now you know I'm expecting you to be responding to things that you're reading, and I'd like you to write a letter to me about that. I've given you a menu of choices to choose from for both fiction and nonfiction books. What I do to make sure that I am not using the same choices all the time is I write the title of the book and then the date I did the letter and just kind of stick it right onto my list. That way I know that I'm not always doing the same thing. Now what I'd like to do is show you how I work with a nonfiction text, and so here's the list of the different responses that I have available. I'd also like to show you a way to help keep from being too overwhelmed about your task by beginning with the end in mind, setting a goal for that finish line. The finish line being that reading response letter due on Friday. Now here's a list of some suggested goals you can set for yourself each night. By Monday, make sure you've selected a book or a text to work with. Make sure that you've got 2 to 3 response choices that you could have. And then make sure that you're making some notes or you're annotating a bit while you're reading. Now, keep in mind your response letter is not a book report. Smaller, shorter pieces of text are perfectly fine. And in this case, I'm going to use an article that I'll give you in class called Icebergs or Floating Snow Cones. It is perfectly okay to respond to something that I give you in class. So here I have this article that I've already read, and I know by looking at some of the response choices, I could write questions that I have about the topic. I didn't really make any connections. I could write some interesting facts and share my opinion. I could do main ideas and details. Or maybe I could choose what information was interesting. I do have a lot of choices, but I think I'm going to go ahead and make some notes and go from there. Now, anytime you have your own copy of something, you can write right on it, but if you need to use just sticky notes, that's fine too. As I was reading, there were some specific things that I kind of noted that I found were interesting, and they really led me to a lot of questions. And so because of that, I know that I'm going to go with this response choice. What questions do you have about the topic? If I go back to my goal sheet, I now know next day I've got my response choice identified, and I've already looked for evidence to support my thinking. That's the great thing about annotating, is I already have some fantastic things to work with. So now I'm on my third goal, or in this case, perhaps Wednesday, if you're doing a little each night. I have 1 to 2 things from my reading ready to go. So in this case, I actually have more, mostly my questions and the things that I found interesting. And I've started the introduction to my letter. Here I've got my date, my greeting, and then I'm starting my body where I'm going to tell you what I'm reading and what I'm responding to, which I've done. See how I've included my date, my greeting, and then I'm telling you the title of my article. I want to be sure that I've written the book title correctly with capital letters and it is underlined. When you're writing a title, most of the letters or the first letters in words get capitalized. Occasionally there are exceptions when they're smaller words, but here's where you're copying your title carefully, so that will help. It's also always important to include the author, and because this was an article that I gave you, it didn't have an author, but I did notice that here along the side it's got information about the publisher. And so I'm going to use that. I am not sure who the author is, but I know the publisher was Heinemann and Curris. Then I'm going to tell you what it is I'm responding to. It helps me if you tell me which choice you're making right in your letter so that I don't have to play guess and figure it out. I kept it simple. When I read this article, I found I had several questions. So now I'm down to the last thing I need to do, which is actually complete the letter. The great thing about this is I've already done all of the thinking, and so I've got my ideas in my head. So here's where I'll finish with the body of my letter, adding that text evidence and explaining my thinking. Then I'll write the closing under my body and then my signature under my closing. So here I finished out the letter, and it went pretty quick because I had all of my parts organized. I used evidence from the text where I cited and I quoted. I explained what I thought about. So here I said, as I read the part, huge areas of ice called ice sheets and glaciers move slowly, I wondered how they move. They are not living things, so something must be pushing them. Then I read the part where it said that scientists call splitting off of icebergs calving. And I thought, why is it called calving? Calving is when cows have babies. These things do not seem related to me. Now, because I like to have at least 3 pieces of evidence from a text to explain, I went on with a third part. And this was a question I actually was able to somewhat answer myself using my own schema. Sometimes when I read, I can infer answers. This happened when I read, the other 4/5 of the berg is hidden underwater. That was my evidence I took right from the text. I wondered why most of the berg would be hidden if it was floating, and then I realized that it was probably pretty heavy, so of course most of it would be weighed down. Wrapped it up with a little bit of a conclusion sentence, and then my signature and closing. Don't forget your signature. That's how I know the letter is from you. Now that I'm all done, I can put my letter in my binder if I brought it home, or at the very least putting it in my backpack. I'm going to hold you accountable for that. I don't want to hear how Mom forgot to put it in your backpack. This is your letter, it's your work, so it's your responsibility.